From the House of Songo, this is Gaytopix, My Life. I'm your host, Kenny Cruz, the only host to bring you the latest headlines and breaking news in the queer community. This is a special series. I felt I needed to document my journey through this life of foreseen experiences and traumatic events. Again, this is Gaytopix My Life, and these are true stories, real life events. These are actual true life experiences that I have encountered as a gay man. This is my story, my confessions, my secrets. Some people may find what I'm saying disturbing, so viewer discretion advised. There's nothing fake or fabricated in what I'm saying. These are actual, true life events. Viewer discretion advised, and all rights are reserved. The light is very blinding, so my head is going to be down as I tell my stories. But it is very difficult to read from the prompter or read at all. Part of being a journalist is writing the story, a compelling story. And I did that in my first two seasons, as host of a different kind of talk show experience. I'm doing this all alone, and I had a vision. Unfortunately, that vision was not met. For one, I like to have, the news scrolling across the bottom. The person I'm talking about on a media wall in back of me, and me sitting at a desk with a suit on, much like Chris Cuomo or David Muir, the skinny tie with a black suit and a black blazer. And I envision this talk show because there's nothing like it on daytime television. In fact, there's nothing like it on nighttime television. There's no representation of the queer community or its allies. I thought I could bring that to the forefront. I was gaining momentum and gaining success as well as fame because I was trusted to give the news in a forthright and a transparent way to make people view the story through a different perspective, to actually see the truth behind the story. That is what my job is as a dedicated journalist. However, I've gone through some serious medical issues, and I'm not able to actually deliver the news in a timely manner. As you've noticed, I have been absent most of the season. But don't fret. I've been documenting my journey in a log that I'm calling my new series, Gaytopix My Life. I like to put some dramatizations there too. You see, I can't present it the way I need to present it, so I think the best way for me to put it out there, because there's so much footage, is to just put it out there as raw and unedited and director's cut. So stay on the lookout for that, for Gaytopix My Life, coming soon to YouTube, hopefully, if I get some help, or when someone sees this when I'm dead. Because there is no legacy. I'm essentially invisible. I've been invisible since I realized I was gay. So we're going to title this story Coming Out. I remember being a little kid I don't recall, maybe it was like 7 or 8 years old. And I was rummaging through the closet one day because I didn't go to school. I've explained that in a past episode of Gay Topics, where it was just better for me to stay home and safer for me to stay home because I was constantly being bullied and jumped and beaten up and robbed and made fun of because I lived in a ghetto and I stuck out like a sore thumb with my skin color. People ridiculed me and called me cracker and honky and faggot and pussy. There were so many names, and I was told to ignore it all, but it was hard to actually learn something in a public school where people are harassing you every single day. But I can remember being around 7 or 8 years old, and my mother used to be an RN until she got addicted to pain medication and was later lost her license and was fired from Long Beach Memorial Hospital. But she would be an RN and she had her medication and stuff like that. And this was back in the day, and this is before beepers, I would say, or any kind of electronic device like mobile phone or anything like that. This was in the 80s and 70s. I'm going to say early 80s. This was like 1985. And she wore the nurse's hat and the nurse's, it was a one-piece suit. And it was like shorts, but it looked like a dress. Kind of like what Terry Alden used to wear in Three's Company. Do you remember that show, Three's Company? And Terry was the last roommate. My favorite roommate, actually. Better than Chrissy, Suzanne Summers, but that's another topic. But Terry used to wear those outfits, and they were quite similar. And the white shoes, of course. So me being home, most of the time, because I would hide under the bed when it was time to go to school, and my mother would get ready for work, and she never realized that I was under the bed, and I essentially had the house to myself most days. I can tell you the lineup on television and everything. I don't, it was All My Children at 1 o'clock, and then it was Beetlejuice at 2, Inspector Gadget at 2:30, Pound Puppies or Muppet Babies. Some babies were, um, no, it wasn't that yet, because that was on Saturday. So was Looney Tunes. It was the Flintstones at 3, and at 3:30 was Woody Woodpecker. At 4 was the Brady Bunch. At 4:30 was Different Strokes. The 5 o'clock news. The 6 o'clock news. 7 was What's Happening. 7:30, Three's Company. 8, The Cosby Show. 8:30, The Facts of Life. 9, The Golden Girls. And 9:30, A Different World. Or maybe The Cosby Show and A Different World were both on at 8 and 8:30, and vice versa for 9:30. But I essentially gave you the lineup for television because I had nothing to do but watch TV. Nothing to do all day long. Just sitting there. I would rummage through things and I would move things and replace them with other things, and I would get beaten when my mother would find out or my stepfather would find out that I moved something. I was learning or teaching myself how to cook. But I remember her wearing this nursing uniform, and I put it on. And I remember walking around the apartment in this uniform, and I had the stethoscope and, you know, her ID tag and her pins that she had won, and I felt like I was an actual nurse, and I came home, well, my mother came home and saw me with them. She had come home early that day. I don't know why, but she had come home early that day and saw me in her uniform and ripped it off me and told me to go to my room and watch TV. Essentially, that's all I ever did was watch TV. I watched TV so much, and I still do to this day. That was not the first inkling. Shortly after that, again, I'm 7 or 8 years old. I was rummaging through the closet, and there was a top shelf that I could not reach. So I had to climb the shelves to get to the top of the shelf, to the top shelf. And I noticed a bunch of towels, some papers. In fact, there was a copy of the United States Constitution that looked like an original. It was like you would touch it and it would turn to dust. It was so fragile and thin and yellow, and the scripture and everything, and it was long, just like the actual Constitution. In fact, I wonder to this day if I still had that, how much money it would be, because I am more than certain it's a copy of the original. Because you see most constitutions, especially now in Congress, they're in little books. This was an actual rolled up piece of paper that was half ripped, and, it looked historic. But I just left it there because I saw something else more intriguing. A dildo. A vibrating dildo. I wondered about this thing and what it was for. I put some batteries in there and it started to vibrate, and I thought it was really cool. And, being as curious as I was, because my aunt would let us, when we would go over to her house, on the rare occasions that we did, to keep us quiet, her and her kids, and my mother and her kids, she would put on porn. And on back in the day, it was a analog um, cable box, so most of us would get it zapped, and so you get all the channels for free. But I remember having all the basic channels, and that what you would get now for $80-$90 was only $7.95. So I can't believe it. That's how long ago this was. And because it was blocked, or X-rated on Cinemax, it was kind of wavy, so sometimes it was really difficult to see, but I could definitely hear it. And I knew, what sex was at this time, because I was being molested at the same time. But because I was being molested so often by my stepfather, I actually began to like it. So when I saw the dildo, I knew exactly what to do. And I played with it, and it hurt like hell. And in order for me to continue with my stepfather molesting me and sexually abusing me, I needed to be ready, because each time it hurt and I bled, and I prepared myself to take his abuse. And I played with this dildo often, so often, in fact, I think my mother eventually found out and removed it from the closet, and I never saw it again. And because I never saw it again, that's when I actually started putting up objects in my butt. I started using cucumbers, and the cucumber failed when it got soft and got stuck inside. I started using bottles and hard objects, to eventually, to the point, as I said, it was easy to take my stepfather's abuse. Then that get to the point where I just said about my stepfather. I was being molested from the years of 18 to 13. 18 to 13, at the peak of my sexuality and the peak of my identity. My mother caught us. I said that in a previous episode of Gaytopix My Life. And she denied it. And ACS removed us so many times because there was never any food. And the food that was there was very grim and, there's barely anything there. I remember one time telling my mother that I was bullied in school and they took my lunch. It was another thing. I was afraid to eat public school lunch because somebody would steal it from me. But somebody did steal it this particular day, and I had gone hungry. And I didn't eat all day. Can you imagine that? A toddler not eating all day. And I called my mother at work and asked her if she can take home something from the cafeteria or even from the vending machine, or maybe stopping off at like a Burger King or something. But of course, when she came home, she didn't have anything. She could have easily gotten some candy. And I waited all night, starving even more and more. And you know what she did? She gave me a raw potato and put sugar on it. And that was what my meal was at 11 o'clock at night. And then I was ordered to go to sleep because now I had my food. I come from a time with when I had a job, the minimum wage was $4.15 an hour. It soon went up to $4.25 an hour and stayed like that for a couple years. But when I had a job, my first job in Burger King, it was $4.15 an hour. I was 15, 16 years old. But there are other times that I knew I was gay when I would watch football, and I don't really know to this day what's actually happening in the game of football because I'm not a fan like that. I used to play John Madden football games on the it was not PlayStation, maybe it was PlayStation or Nintendo. I think it was Nintendo at the time. I remember playing John Madden and not knowing what I was doing. But I watched football, one, because there was nothing else on TV, and two, because I was getting sexually aroused by them. All jumping on top of each other, their cups making their cocks look big, their asses looking all firm and tight. Oh, it was so beautiful watching football. Even to this day, I still get sexually aroused watching football. Another time I realized that I was gay was when I was 14 years old. My father, my actual father, or who I believe to be my father, because I explained this in an episode of Gaytopix My Life, that I come to find out that he wasn't my actual father, and I don't know who my father is. I don't even have a godmother, and I don't know any of his family, and he wasn't paying child support, and my mother blamed him for so many things, but the reality was she cheated on him and got pregnant and had me and my sister. And then she did it again and had my younger brother. But my father stepped up to the plate and took care of us. Granted, he became an alcoholic, but he took care of us because he was still going to work. He still cooked dinner. He still took care of us and gave us our allowance and everything. He was a good father. And he wasn't a bad drunk at all. But my mother made him seem like he was a bad drunk so we can hate him more and want him out of the house more. But I remember being 14 years old, and he had taken all of my brothers and my sister to his company picnic outing over a couple of years. And of course, I was the last one, and he invited me, and I went, and everything was going well until he told me to go get some ketchup. Because I like my burgers medium rare with ketchup and mustard and onions. Maybe throw some cheese on there too and bacon. But that's how I like them. And the ketchup bottle was empty. So I only had mustard on the burger. And I was like, I don't want to eat my burger with mustard on it, you know? So I went to get ketchup at an. We were sitting on those benches in the park, you know, that you see at most campgrounds and stuff like that. And I remember getting up from there and scurrying, if you will, or hurrying, you know, speeding up just a wee bit to get back to sitting down and finishing my meal. And my father steps up from the table and says in Spanish, I have a boy, not a girl. You faggot. We went home and we drove home, and he didn't say a word to me. I didn't say a word to him. He took me from that space, and my food was left on the table, and we got in the car and went home. And as I said, we didn't converse at all. In fact, he became so estranged after that, and I never saw him again. He lived in the same neighborhood too, but every time that I would go and visit, there would be an excuse as to where he was or where he wasn't. So I haven't seen my father since 14 years old. You will soon come to find out what eventually happened to him in my continuing series, Gaytopix My Life. These are real life stories. They are real life events. These are actual events that happened in my life. There's nothing fake or fabricated about these stories. They happened to me. These are my stories, my confessions, my life. This is Gaytopix My Life. I'm your host, Kenny Cruz. Remember, you're always in a mix with gay topics. Moving further with knowing that I was gay was that we lived in the projects, in NYCHA projects. And like I said, it's the ghetto, and we're surrounded by projects and a community that is predominantly black. I wouldn't, maybe there were like 2 Latino families, 3 if you include us, but no one looked at me and as a Latino. Somehow, even to this day, having blonde hair and blue eyes is a horrible thing. And people look upon, frown upon that. But I remember my mother forbid me to use the phone. So I was one of those teenagers that was essentially cut off from technology. And I was never even allowed to have friends home. And it was very difficult for me and very isolating. As I said, I think for many years my mother tried to get rid of me, to murder me, to end my life, to eventually make me disappear. Because she wouldn't care about anything that I did, or was not inspired, or didn't even want to help assist in anything in furthering my success or growth into manhood. Like, she wouldn't even write, an absent note or a, a permission slip to the trip, to a trip that we were going to, or my report card. I eventually learned how to write like her, exactly like her. So I ended up forging most of the documents that I needed because going to her was was very difficult. And most of the times she brushed me off by saying, "Yeah," but it was always no. No, 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 no. I can understand you don't want me having conversations on your phone for long periods of time because, again, this is a time before call waiting and, cell phones and things like that. But she wouldn't even provide me the quarter to go outside and use a payphone. So she was not very supportive in any kind of way. In fact, I remember applying to so many colleges and not hearing back from a single one of them. I eventually went to Baruch College, but I got accepted to Brown, to Berkeley, Medgar Evers, and Hunter. How I found out was my mother collected cats. My mother had at least 60 cats in a three-bedroom apartment. And it was very, ugh, there was no furniture. Everything stunk like pee or when they spray. It was hard for me to go to school because I smelled like cat. Had another thing to make fun of me for. It was very hard, and my mother put us through that. But I felt it was more on me because she knew that I was gay, because I was having sex with her husband, I was playing with her dildos, I was watching porn, I was wearing her clothes. I mean, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out that your son is different. But another form of communication I had was a beeper. I had gotten a beeper because I needed to keep in contact with the very little people that I was engaging with, like my classmates, to find out about homework or just to kiki on the phone. And I would go to this payphone on the corner and drop quarter after 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 quarter and be there on that phone, rain, sleet, or snow, for hours talking. And I remember every time that I got off the phone, all the thugs ran up to the phone to get the change out the phone. So they knew once they saw me standing there that they was going to get some money. So they didn't bother me, but I knew a way of being gay was because of the phone line. At this time, in in the 90s, I think it was, there was a thing called the phone line, and you would call the phone line, and it would have your boroughs. So it was like press 1 for the Bronx or press 2 for Queens, and then you would press them, and then you would leave a voicemail, and then people would respond to that by leaving messages if they were interested in you. Because I was so young, I whenever I hooked up, I had to make sure that I would spend the night so I can be safe. Because I did not feel safe on the subways. You think the subways are bad now with people being pushed and shoved? It was much worse back then. There was graffiti all over the place, and the trains barely ran, and it was really horrible. But I I remember being on the train, going to this hookup on Clinton, Washington, on the A line that I met on the phone line. I get to his house. He looks at me he doesn't look so happy, but he was a black man, and he welcomed me in. We had sex. He disappeared, and he disappeared for quite some time, maybe like 45 minutes. And I can hear him rummaging through the house and going through the house. I was like, maybe he's making me something to eat. So while he was away, I actually got on the phone because I had gotten paged. So I went to check my messages. And he comes into the room and sees me on the phone and had the audacity to tell me I called the phone line looking for other dates while I was at his house. One, I'm a naive child, teenager. Two, I told you I was going to spend the night. Three, why would I look for somebody else when I have you here? He was not having any of it. No matter how much I tried to explain to him that he was wrong, he eventually kicked me out, and it it hurt me because each time that I had a hookup, I was expecting some type of second hookup or a third hookup, but it was always one, except Uncle Juan. And I explained Uncle Juan in a previous episode of Gay Topics as well. Gaytopix My Life. I've revealed a lot, and that's the key to journalism. My vulnerability is my strength. I look for tranquility in everything, and my life has been all but tranquil or peaceful. I'm so broken and damaged. There's so many things that just don't work in my favor. There was another time I used to hook up through an alternative. In the Village Voice and HX magazine, which I later ended up becoming employed for, but that's later on in my series Gaytopix My Life. But we'll get to that later. But you can put your personal ad for free, but you had to pay for the messages that you would get. So I would get like one or two and say that I was 18. And I remember on this one was in Bed-Stuy. And I'm responding to one individual, Darren, if I remember his name correctly, and my memory serves me right. He invites me to his house in Bed-Stuy on Chauncey Street on the J line. I get there, and there's somebody else there. So eventually, they tried to have a threesome with me. Again, I'm a teenager, and I let one of them, do what they needed to do, but I painted all over the place. Because I was not expecting, because my ad said nothing about sex. So I was not expecting to have sex, and that's when I knew what the classified sections were for. But I painted all over the place, and he continued, I guess, and then it was time for the other guy, and the other guy had at least a 12-inch dick, and it's like, you think you're going to put that in me? And he tried, and it was very painful, and I told him no. So when he pulled out his cock, on the condom was full of paint. So they left the room, and they left me there naked on a sheet on the floor because they wouldn't have me on the furniture. And as I sit up there, they eventually come back after 10 minutes, and one of them tells me I can take a shower. When I get up and take a shower, I notice that I left a track mark on the sheet. I felt so embarrassed, but yet I called him the next day because I wanted to continue the relationship, or at least, have sex with you with a clean hole. But my mother was in the background, and she was screaming whore and bitch and tramp and slut. And I mean, this guy as a grown man had to know that I was a child at this point by hearing my mother speak in that language. So of course I never heard from him again. Uncle Juan shortly followed after that. Again, Uncle Juan, I have a series about him. I also knew that I was gay was when I was in the army, and one night I don't want to talk about the army because I want to get the army all in one shell as I speak about it. Because remember, the last time that I stopped telling stories was right before I went to basic training. So I want to start there and then do the army in a segment, and then me coming home after that to another segment, and me being a porn star in another segment. But there's so many stories and so many things. I have to get these stories out because it's taking up a lot of space. Um, Another time, well, since we're on the topic of being gay and men and dates and stuff like that, we can keep going with that subject and segment. It was, I think it was George W. Bush and John Kerry were running for president. I favored George W. Bush. I did. But I'm a firm Democrat, and I will always vote Democrat. But I told this date, I took him to a nice, fancy Italian restaurant, and, we were supposed to go Dutch. But we sat down, and when the food came, he asked me the question, "Who are you voting for?" And I said George W. Bush, and because I like some of the things that he's promising, and I think he will really do good. And George Bush did eventually win the election, but not in New York. New York is a Democratic state, so he did win, though, and the guy kept belittling me and badgering me and harassing me in this restaurant, and the people are starting to look at us like, why is he talking to him like that and criticizing me for being a bigot and, a hypocrite that I was Democrat and voting for a Republican. In fact, he got so agitated and said, I have to go to the bathroom, and never came back and left me with the bill. And I'm a teenager. Thank God for working at Burger King and McDonald's, because I would have not been able to afford it. There was another time where I was on a date, and I saw the $6 Million Man with Marlon Wayans. And this guy picks me up. We end up going into the movie theaters just as the credits, the preview started to show. He saw a couple of them and was eating some popcorn, but the previews didn't finish when he said, I have to go to the bathroom. He never came back. He essentially left me there stranded. Another time, this date takes me to a movie, and the movie was The Passion of the Christ. Why on earth would someone take someone there on a first date to watch The Passion of the Christ? I don't know in hell. But everyone in that movie theater was crying, including himself. And I felt so bad that all the sins that I've committed, that Jesus had to go through all that whipping and torture just because of my sins. I felt horrible after that movie, and I never saw him again. But that wasn't my problem because he picked the wrong movie. Ugh. Ugh. There have been other dates where, like Rajin. Rajin was a really cool dude. I really liked him. He was a phlebotomist for the Red Cross. Whenever you donate blood, he would draw your blood. But he was also a crackhead. He did coke almost every single day. In fact, I tried coke for the first time with him, and we had sex. We did everything as a couple for at least 3 months, but he would never introduce me as his man or his boyfriend or someone he was talking to or dating. And it bothered me. And I kept stressing to him. I was like, what do we have here? Is there something here? And he eventually got tired of me questioning him, and we broke up. But get this, the person that he had before me, he was in a relationship with. I was not the relationship, but the person after me, he ends up getting a relationship with and ends up marrying him. I mean, he wasn't as sexy as I was, but it, it, it really, was like a dagger to my heart. And then I remember doing a show at the West Side Club, performing when I was famous, and he was one of the guests there. And I thought to myself, how are you married and in a sex club? But he kept pressuring me to have sex with me, and I refused because he had hurt me so bad. I didn't want anything to do with him, and he kept begging and was so loud, and was like, I can't. Eventually he ends up leaving, but he didn't really understand, because I tried to add him as a friend when I had Facebook, and he blocked me. There's another guy named Ira. Ira introduced me to culture. In fact, I think he had like OCD or something, because he was always so clean and immaculate, and he lived in Bedford Park of the Bronx, which was a very beautiful area at the time. And we would go to museums. He would recommend books like other people have done in my past. And we got into a fight about me being late to go to a museum or something like that. And we stopped speaking. We eventually hook up again, but at this time he lived on the Upper East Side. And he was a dean of students or some kind of dean in a college. And he would freebase. He had aluminum foil and took the aluminum foil and light his crack. I could not believe that here it is, someone who works for the Department of Education is smoking crack and wanted me to do it. I've seen the effects of what crack can do, and I'm not chasing a high that only lasts 4 minutes. That's not going to happen. Even if it was recreational, I can't chase a high that lasts 4 minutes. And some crackheads chase and get so caught up in that and get so lost. But he invites me to his house on 67th Street and I think like 2nd Avenue in a 6-story walk-up. Jesus Christmas. I was like, wow, it must be difficult to do laundry or even bring your furniture up. How did you get your couch in the house? And, he tells me to get comfortable. And this is before I ever even started the gym or even knowing what the gym was about. And my stomach was a little bit flabby. He called me a fat pig and was disgusted by what he saw and didn't want to have sex with me. In fact, he told me to get out his house. And I did. And then a couple years go by and I haven't heard from him. And then I bump into him in a bar, and he gives me his new number and tells me that he lives in Jersey City, invites me to his house in Jersey City, overlooking the Hudson River. It's a beautiful apartment. But again, he's still freebasing. I don't know where he works at or anything of that nature, but he asked me if I wanted a job. And I told him it depends. So he told me I would essentially be his assistant and that I would only get paid once a month. To me, that was an extreme problem for me considering the fact, too, that it was only $22,000 a year, I was like, no, that's not going to happen. So I gave the job to my aunt, and she was too old, so she gave it to her daughter, my cousin, and my cousin ended up having a job until they closed. And she never thanked me for that, or never even repaid the favor. When you do something nice for somebody, something nice should be done to you. Like, isn't that a blessing? I bless you, and you blessings come to me, or you blessings come to you. We bless each other. But it never really ended up being like that. In fact, I actually stopped speaking to my Aunt Renee. I spoke about that in a previous episode of Gaytopix My Life. But I didn't take the job, but I still remained friends with him. And I found that to be something very similar in my life. I've tried to be friends with addicts. I tried to be friends with people who suffered abuse. I tried to be friends with all kinds of people, even a deaf man. And we were communicating by writing notes. I tried to make friends as best as I possibly could, but nobody would accept the invitation. Nobody wanted to be my friend. But a couple years had passed, and I eventually resurfaced in a new apartment on 191st Street in the A line in the Fort Tryon Park area. Beautiful, beautiful area. In fact, he was having to move. He claimed he was moving to another job that was out of state or in upstate New York and would be gone, and he needed somebody to watch his apartment and sublease his apartment for, he said, a year, but it could be longer. So I thought, oh, wow, this is an opportunity for me and my dog to actually, live in a new apartment than where I was living in the Bronx, which was even more ghetto than where I grew up. So I moved all my stuff in. It was a studio apartment, and again, I'm watching him freebase. But as I'm watching him freebasing, I'm noticing that things are missing. Like, there's no TV. There's no microwave. There's no coffee maker. There's no couch. It was just a bed in a studio apartment. Things were missing, and I thought that was strange. Come to find out, he had to sell them to pay his debt. So I eventually used my TV, and he takes complete control over it as if it was his and he was living in his apartment. And as the weeks went by, I'm like, wait a minute, you were supposed to leave 10 days ago. What's going on? And I knew at that time I was being played. He just wanted me to pay his rent while the money that he received was going to support his habit. And I was offended, and I told him to immediately help me move back into my old apartment. And I did. And I stayed there for a long time before the marshals came and got me. But when they came and got me, they kicked me out so early in the morning with the dog, BillClinton, and they changed the locks, but I still had a lock to the main door, the main entrance. So I walked around the block a couple times, and I stayed outside for at least 2-3 hours. And along 138th Street in the Bronx, there's all these kind of stores. There's bakeries and chicken joints and pizzerias and supermarkets and pharmacies and so forth and so on. And bodegas, especially bodegas. There was a locksmith. So I go across the street to the locksmith and tell him I locked myself outside the house. I think he knew what was going on, but he didn't question it because he was getting paid. And I gave him a good tip, so, it took him a long time to put the lock on, but he fixed the lock and changed the lock, and I ended up staying in the apartment for at least another month before the marshals came. Nothing was going to stop me from moving. Another time that I was gay, that I realized that I was gay, was that I lived in a shelter called 39. It was the old Cumberland Hospital in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, because my mother couldn't afford to pay rent because she was so busy painting her nails and supporting her addiction and doing her hair, trying to look pretty for people that were not attracted to her because of her attitude and her addiction. But we ended up getting evicted. I ended up being stranded outside with the dog, and we had to move in with Grandma. Stayed at Grandma's house. They put my dog to sleep, and we moved into a shelter, the old Cumberland Hospital in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. We call it 39 because that's the address, 39 Cumberland Street. I explained that all about my dog in a previous episode of Gaytopix My Life, so I hope you've been keeping up with these stories. Again, these are real life events. They are true stories. They actually happened to me. There's nothing fake or fabricated in what I'm saying. Some viewers may find what I'm saying to be disturbing, so viewer discretion advised. All rights reserved. So we get to 39, and it's essentially a hospital that they turned into a family shelter. Oh, the food was so horrible. They were like TV dinners that were, beyond its sell date and rotten and old, and most people didn't eat the food there. But you had to do everything in public. So you had to take a shower in public, you had to do your laundry in public, and on each different floor they had washers and dryers and stuff. So everybody essentially got to see your personal side that really shouldn't see, that you should only see in your house. And to separate, because the wards were so big, and to separate the families, people would tie rope from one locker to the next because you had a personal locker, and then put a sheet over it. But I remember the cleaning guy who used to mop up the floors and take out the garbage and stuff was so sexy. His name was Michael. And he was this skinny black man with a beautiful toned body and black skin and purple lips, and was just so beautiful. And he had curly black hair, and I was so attracted to him. And there was also a bully in the shelter. The bully name was Midnight. And the reason why his name was Midnight was because he was so dark. Excuse me. You would mark him absent in night school. Let's repeat that again. He was so dark, you could mark him absent in night school. And I think because of that insecurity, he became a bully. So he would chase the little kids, up and down the halls, and the security would have to stop us and things like that. And I remember hiding from him one day in one of those wards in somebody else's, I guess you want to call, space. Like, as I said, they put the sheets up and things. I didn't realize anybody was there, but I was hiding underneath the bed. And the guy was jerking off. And I was getting really turned on. And I was, I guess, whimpering or something, or he heard me, or I moved inappropriately, and he heard me. And he got up and he stood with his dick so firm and said, "Get the fuck out of here." Do you know, the next day, when I woke up and passed by, the sheets were even higher. I guess I'm grateful I was not beat up, but I think he knew that I was a kid and I was just curious. But as I tried to explain to him, I was just hiding from the bully. But that was another time that I realized I was gay. I also had a girlfriend at that time too, and I would fantasize about the cleaning guy. You know, now speaking about cleaning guys, I remember this story too. Back to when I was a child, we had a super. His name was Sam, and he had this thick beard, and he lived in the basement. And they were doing some construction work in the bathroom, but there was essentially a hole where the tub was, and we had to wait for the parts or the tub or something like that, and it took a couple days. But every day that I would stare out that window because there was nothing else to do aside from watch TV. I would stare out those gates and I would watch him fixing cars or doing the garbage, taking out the garbage and sorting it and recycling it and, smoking cigarettes outside. But he had that very like 70s, 80s vibe to him. But to me, he was one of the most gorgeous men I've ever seen. And I wanted to see more of him. And as I said, they were fixing the bathroom. And one night I was listening. Well, I wasn't listening, but I went to the bathroom and I heard them having sex. Him and some girl. And I looked and I peeked and I watched them having sex. Again, this is how I knew where to stick the dildo because I was very informed about what to do in sex. My mother never told me anything. In fact, she refused to even engage in anything that I asked or wanted or needed. My mother was such a bitch. There's so many stories to tell. Like, I would meet people off the phone line and I would say, I'm standing on this corner with a rose, and I would do things like that with a teddy bear or something, and people would just leave me standing there as if I was like some hideous monster. I mean, I am a hideous monster now when I can't see, and I've aged dramatically in the past couple months, but I was at the prime of my life. I was so youthful and beautiful and had innocence. And it's, oh, I would get stood up so often and it would hurt so bad. But then every time that I got rejected, I went out and looked for even more and even more. To the point at one time I had 7 boyfriends. And it was hard to keep up with what I was saying to each of them. But it was no different from them either because they had side pieces on the side as well. So it was no different. So even if they knew that I had 7 boyfriends, they also had some boyfriends as well on the side. But as far as I can recollect for now, because it's really late and my eyes are burning, it's all I can remember about me coming out. Again, this is my story, my confessions, my life. I'm your host, Kenny Cruz, and this is Gaytopix My Life. I hope to see you, no pun intended, soon.